Watch this.
With the option of a primary taken away, Idaho Republicans want to hold a caucus next spring to decide a presidential candidate. But not all of them, because it likely won't give all Republicans a chance to participate. We're breaking down the break in GOP Harmony. You know, it wasn't that long ago caucuses were being held by both parties in Idaho. So what would it look like to bring it back? We asked the Democrats, the last party to hold one in the Gem State. It's wildfire season, and that means firefighters are hard at work protecting our state. But these days, they're using more than just shovels. They're getting a little help from drones, and they're protecting our cows, too. About a month into the last legislative session, Republican Representative Dustin Manwaring, alongside newly elected Secretary of State Phil McGrain, introduced House Bill 138. This was the bill that was intended to take the state presidential primary we usually hold in March and move it to May to coincide with the regular primary we have every other year to vote for state offices. And making this move was supposed to do two things. It would go along with the push among many in the majority party that Idaho has too many election days, so consolidate them. And it would save the state $2.7 million to move it to May. Well, it passed the House with flying colors. However, while it was over on the Senate side, the bill's sponsors were notified there might be a problem with the bill. While it did those two things, consolidating and saving money, it also eliminated a presidential primary altogether because it removed language which specified the filing process for presidential candidates, things like filing deadlines and such. They were not accounted for in this new bill. It still passed the Senate and was signed by the governor on March 30th. And that date is significant because in an effort to fix that error, Representative Manwaring tried to push a trailer bill through the House State Affairs Committee on the morning of March 30th. State Republican Party Chairwoman Dorothy Moon showed up to say she was not a fan.
I represent the party of Idaho here in Idaho, and I'm very concerned that the primary stakeholder on this issue was never consulted.
She added an anecdote about how she spoke with Secretary McGrain about it and made it clear she did not support House Bill 138. In fact, she actually wanted Idaho to move its presidential primary to February to make Idaho, as she put it, the Iowa of the West. Okay, despite how many times people actually geographically confuse Idaho for Iowa, we have never really had much impact on the presidential election because, well, of our lack of delegates. So that probably wouldn't happen no matter when we held a presidential primary. Regardless, the House committee meeting about the trailer bill, Senate Bill 1186, the one to fix the mistake, well, it ended like this.
Thank you, Representative Manwaring. Any final questions for Representative Manwaring? Seeing none, Senate Bill 1186 is properly before the committee. Senate Bill 1186 dies for a lack of a motion.
Sorry.
Already made my decision.
Already made his decision. He waited 5 seconds to make that decision, by the way. He gavelled the end of the meeting 18 seconds after that, leaving another item on the agenda for the next day. However, there would be no next day for the State Affairs Committee or the House State Affairs Committee, and the legislature would sine die a week later. So 1186, well, that never showed up again. Then in June, at the state party meeting in Challis, the Idaho GOP decided they're going to solve the problem of not being able to have a presidential primary leading up to the 2024 election by going old school.
The Firehouse Caucus is our solution. On Saturday, March 2nd, 2024, Republican voters from across the state will gather in their counties and districts to select our delegates to the RNC's presidential nominating contest. This moves Idaho into the early stages of the nominating fight, allowing Idaho Republicans to vote before Super Tuesday.
So the caucus, for those who are not aware, is a word without a definitive origin. It first showed up in the Northeast colonies of early America, and it referred to clubs or meetings where people got together to discuss politics, to elect someone or decide on an idea. And that's what happens in a modern-day caucus, too. People get together in a room to discuss who they want to elect. People make speeches to convince those who are undecided or persuade someone else to jump ship, and they physically stand together in a group to show their support of one candidate or another. And this continues until one group contains a majority of the whole. And it's a process that could take hours. And in Idaho, it's been within the last decade, political parties have held caucuses in presidential primaries. The Democrats had one in 2016. the Republicans back in 2012. So the biggest difference between a caucus and a primary, you might be asking, well, it's the number of people who participate. And we're going to get into that in just a bit. But that was a big complaint coming out of the GOP summer meeting, this idea of having Republican issues and candidates decided by a smaller percentage of the party. And this idea, Joe Paris found out, is really driving a wedge through the Republican Party of Idaho.
What I'm hearing from my constituents and other members of the Republican Senate is that it's much better to let people go to the polls. You know, we've talked a lot about election integrity and making sure people have the right to vote. This is one of those issues. We need to make sure that we do not exclude or disenfranchise people who want to participate in the presidential primary.
Senate Majority Leader Kelly Anthon, along with other Republican legislators, received this email from Party Chair Dorothy Moon. In it, Moon says that the party will be having a March caucus unless lawmakers repeal House Bill 138, restoring the March election date. Lawmakers passed House Bill 138 to consolidate the March and May elections in Idaho so they could save millions of dollars.
I can tell you, I am not voting to repeal something that is saving the taxpayers $3 million every election cycle. Both chambers, we're always trying to be super conscious of taxpayer dollars and where they can be efficiently used. And that's why we did the consolidation down to May.
House Majority Leader Megan Blanksma says lawmakers clearly voted to consolidate elections to save money. It's not something they will just undo on a whim. On top of that, she is hearing major concerns from constituents about a March caucus. Questions about voter turnout, the format of it all, if different areas even have facilities to hold a caucus. What about weather conditions to travel?
What we're hearing from our constituents is there a way for you to help to make sure that all of the voices of the constituents that are registered Republicans are heard?
That is a complicated question because the State Central Committee and the legislature, they operate in different spheres.
Does the chairman and the State Central Committee have the authority to say, regardless of what gets passed here, we don't want to do a May primary, we are going to do a March caucus?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's because it's the Republican Party. It's not the Idaho State Legislature that determines.
Leader Anthon appreciates the position of wanting a March primary. He pushed for the idea in the legislative session.
I supported leaving the primary in March, but I also represent all of the Republicans in the Idaho State Senate. And it's very clear that the majority of Republicans wanted to move that primary. For me now, it's not so much about my own personal position on the thing, it's a matter of, are we going to allow, how can we allow the Idaho voter to go to the polls and cast their own votes and get as much participation as possible in choosing who should be nominated as a Republican presidential nominee?
For now, lawmakers don't want to call a special session because they may not be able to solve the issue if the State Central Committee won't budge on having a March caucus. On top of that, the clock is ticking on national deadlines for the GOP process.
So I don't know that there's a legislative solution. I don't know if it means we start working with the National Party to see if we can find another avenue, at least so people feel like they're heard. We've not come to any sort of solution to what our constituents are asking us for.
And Leader Blanksma does tell me that yesterday they talked through about 10 different ideas, and they're still working as a leadership group to see what path forward there could be. I will add, I did reach out to Chairwoman Dorothy Moon with the Idaho State Republican Party. I did ask her about her thoughts on kind of rescinding the saving of tax dollars, about $3 million that the House bill accomplished. I also asked her about a hypothetical, Brian, that we have heard from lawmakers and other people in the community. So as you touched on, in a caucus, it's one time at one place. If you're active duty or if you're sick or if you're not able to make it that day, do you just lose your ability to vote or be a part of it?
Okay, so the legislature gave themselves the ability to call themselves back. Is that a possibility to decide this before March?
They could, but at the same time...
Before January, I should say.
There are deadlines, October, end of this year, from the GOP nationally, that you need to hit these deadlines. So if they were to come back in January and do it, it might be too late. So a special session, could the lawmakers call themselves back? They could, but at the same time, even if they do create a May primary, we heard from Chairwoman Moon that she wants to do a March caucus. And Chair Moon has really been clear that she believes Idaho should be earlier in the process. So we'll see how this shakes out, but right now it's not solved.
We've also heard from Secretary McGrain that even if they wait till the session starts in January, it may not be enough time to start something up for a March primary. Thank you very much, Joe. Meanwhile, on the other side of the spectrum, the ask for a primary election is unanimous. Last month, the Idaho Democratic State Central Committee announced they wanted a special session to figure it all out as well. Like we said, they have the most recent experience with a presidential caucus, nearly 2 election cycles ago, but still not long enough for the bad taste to have left their mouths. Andrew Bartline talked to the Idaho Democrats today, and they tell you, Andrew, I should say, they have no interest in going back to this.
Yeah, the Idaho Democrats describe the process as arduous. That's $1 million word to describe what they say is as many problems, mostly due to the logistics. But even at its best, the Democrats are convinced a caucus is an inferior process to a primary for the people of Idaho to select their chosen candidate. There's a time and place where political preferences take center stage. Because at a presidential caucus, each voter's fighting for their voice to be heard. But some say they shouldn't have to.
Yeah.
Including Idaho Democrats Jared DeLoof.
Our principle is one person, one vote, and that is what this should be.
Should be, because a caucus has added barriers.
The process takes hours.
And that's not until you even get in the door. This line is footage from the Ada County Democrats' 2016 presidential caucus. The party knows the struggles firsthand.
It's an incredibly difficult thing to pull off, and essentially you have to get all of the voters who want to participate into one room somewhere and actually be able to count them and have them cast their ballot in that sort of way.
The signs, the teams, the chants. The process, it better resembles a sporting event than election. Fittingly in a venue best known for puck drops.
You have to ask the question, who does this benefit?
Numbers show, not the voters. In the Idaho Democratic 2016 presidential caucus, roughly 24,000 people voted. In the Democrats' 2020 presidential primary, nearly 110,000 Idahoans cast their ballots. That primary shows a 350% increase in voter participation.
Everything that we have seen is the far right continues to gain more power in the Republican Party.
Power that DeLoof says is inherently built into the caucus system. Amid the debates and discourse, it's the political party, not the state, playing the part of referee.
Determine the time, location, the rules of who can participate, and so it's very easy for party bosses to put their thumb on the scale here, which should be of a concern for everybody.
But not of high enough concern for the powers that be inside.
This is just another case of will the moderate Republicans ever stand up to the far right?
The current law states the Democrats can still run a regular primary in place of a caucus, but that requires more of their private dime, time, and resources.
It's an incredible financial and organizational burden that neither party would be well equipped to do.
DeLoof and the Democrats are calling on a special session to pass the trailer bill to bring back state-run presidential primary elections. But he's been in this game before.
We're not holding our breath, we'll say that.
Because most likely, he'll be holding a caucus.
As someone who cares about every Idahoan being able to vote, there's a lot of concerns with how this is going to be conducted, even on the Republican side.
If stuck holding a caucus, DeLoof says the Democrats are committed to a plan that allows military members serving out of country to participate. If 2/3 of lawmakers cannot come to an agreement to get together for a special session, the Democrats say then it's Governor Brad Little's job to call that special session. And between the Democrats and what seems to be a decent chunk of Republicans on the other end, you would think, Brian, that there's a simple majority, but for this to happen, as you touched on earlier, that bill would still have to get out of Chairman Crane's desk.
It would, and it didn't at the end of last session. You talked about the Democratic numbers when it comes to caucus versus primary. Some Republican numbers for you. 2012 was the last time they held their caucus, right? In Idaho. 45,000 Republicans participated in that caucus. Jump ahead to the next year, 4 years later in 2016, 225,000 Republicans participated. So a vast difference between participation numbers from one year to the next.
Clearly a drop in participation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Andrew. Okay, that didn't take too much time. 3 days after listening to arguments about whether Idaho's Attorney General Raul Labrador showed bias in naming the proposed ballot initiative on open primaries, the Idaho Supreme Court has come to the conclusion, well, he has. Idahoans for open primaries who want to open up Idaho's primaries, they want to unclose the GOP primary, they filed a lawsuit against Attorney General Labrador, and they made their case Monday in front of the justices. They argued the titles the AG's office gave those initiatives, or that initiative, how it would be known to potential voters when they went out and asked them to sign it, They said it was biased and it was misleading against the initiative. And they used the AG's social media posts as evidence of his quote, strong animus toward the idea. Well, the unanimous opinion written by Justice Colleen Zahn agreed. Or the short and general ballot titles fail to substantially comply with Idaho code, basically because the titles have to be written so they are easily understood, in description and explanation, in commonly known language. Justice Zahn wrote, the term non-party blanket primary does not fit that bill, calling it distinctive and prejudicial. She also said describing the open primary as requiring ranked choice voting, well, that's also prejudicial. And while Idahoans for open primaries did get those rewritten titles, they did not get the extension to collect signatures. They'd hoped they could have a longer period of time to collect those signatures, seeing as how they were tied up with this court case. And, well, they didn't want to go out and ask registered voters to sign something which didn't best describe what they wanted to do. That deadline to collect 63,000 signatures to get that initiative on a ballot is still set for the end of April 2024 in order to qualify for that November general election. Oh, and Justice Zahn also said the AG's office is on the hook for attorney's fees, meaning you are on the hook for attorney's fees. Okay, so a few of the messages that we've seen this week from you have to do with our 411 segment, that part of the show with a little roundup of other news that we don't really have time to dig into here on the 208. Doug in Twin, for example, has had a problem with, of all things, the music. Please stop the monotonous music in the background during the 411, he says. It's torture. Okay, Doug, we hear you. Now hear this, today's 411.
We're ready to start taking young people and start the real work, the really hard work of working with these youth and families.
Today, the Idaho Youth Ranch finished their new campus in Caldwell after years of planning and construction, all to start helping Idaho kids on their path to healing. The center will provide 24-hour nursing, psychiatric care, a variety of therapies, and year-round schooling for more than 100 kids, ages 11 to 17. The nonprofit says that hundreds of Idaho children who suffer from severe trauma get sent out of state every year for care. So now there will be a place that is closer to home so families can check in. The center welcomes the first group of kids on the 15th. You know what else is opening? Hit the bricks. It's a brand new Lego store. Yes, Meridian is bringing back the nostalgia of bins of building blocks. Tomorrow at the Village. The store includes lots of Legos, obviously, brick specialists, who knew that was a job? And yes, they will help you find the perfect Lego. And they will have hands-on building challenges every single month. So stick with the instructions or mix your pieces and enjoy being a kid again over at the Lego store. It's a personal favorite of ours on the 208. There's something so Idaho that you can be a part of. The Trailing of the Sheep Festival is up for Best Fall Festival by USA Today. You can make it first out of 20 other nominees by voting on www.10best.com. Voting ends on September 4th, then winners are announced September 15th. Oh, and you can vote once a day until the deadline. And of course, the trailing of the Sheep Festival coming up October 4th through the 8th.
The city of Leadore has come up a few times here on the 2-8. First, about the time we were talking about the Hayden fire, burning about 18 miles west of that city. Then, well, we got called out because a few times we may have pronounced it incorrectly. We know it's Leadore, not Ladore, not Ladore. We get it. But today we're back talking about it because of the Hayden fire. And yes, that is still burning. But this isn't going to be your regular fire update where we talk about acreages and buildings lost possibly and how dangerous this is. But Sophia Bliss joining us now, learning of something that kind of, well, I guess you could call it unique, that happened while they were fighting this fire.
Yes, exactly. We had some drone operations. During normal fire operations, those firefighters were using a drone when they spotted some valuable assets. Eldon Alexander is the liaison officer with the Great Basin Team 4. He says drones are useful for many things when it comes to wildfires.
The thermal cameras with the videos and still pictures that it can take to help us get a 360-degree view of those fires from the air. We knew that there was cattle in the area. We knew there was missing cattle, which is an incredible value and to the ranchers and important to their livelihood.
Alexander says drone operators were tasked with marking where the cattle were if they saw any, and they did. Once they mark where the cattle are, they pass that information along to ranchers.
They got the heads up. They felt with those locations that the cattle were in a good spot for right now. They felt good leaving them where they were at. They were safe. They were outside the immediate fire threat area. You know, something as simple and as Idaho, as cattle ranchers, and being able to utilize public lands for grazing, meeting the technology of the UAS and the drones going up there and doing that. So it's pretty neat that we're able to combine those two and make something positive happen out of a not so positive situation.
As of today, the Hayden fire is the second largest fire burning in the state and is still 48% contained. Brian, I just know that now that the cattle are in a safe spot, it's just got to be such a relief for ranchers to know, then let them rest easier.
Exactly. And finding out that technology helped them do this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's kind of a nice surprise for both sides, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Sophia. Oh, the largest fire burning in the state right now, that is the Elkhorn fire. That is almost 25,800 acres, and it's only 12% contained. So we'll keep you updated with that on the other newscasts throughout the day. Primary versus a caucus. Steve says the Moon GOP Central Committee doesn't want the average GOP voters to vote on anything. If you, by average, you mean moderate, well, you might be right. This one, how can we be sure that the results of the caucus reflect the preference of the participants and there is no fraud, asked Rhonda. That's a very good question. Who oversees this kind of stuff? Another good question. As a Democrat, I say to caucuses, I'd rather have an election than spend hours at a caucus, says Lorene in Fruitland. Watch your step in Meridian, new Lego store. If you've done it, you know. We'll see you tomorrow.